Okay. Where are we at?
I'm doing okay. I've got, I'm all set up to record. I've got my headset. I've got my fancy cup of tea. I've got my heating on because November has hit us.
Yes, I'm curled up in my little blanket tent with a little hot water bottle.
I also have a hot water bottle. It's that time of year and my feet get cold.
Mm. It is officially winter time, though by the time people are listening to this, it's probably not.
It's probably spring for the listener.
Yeah.
Through the miracles of asynchronous communication.
And let's be honest, we're both busy people. If we tried to make this like a podcast that we recorded and then uploaded within a week or so, we would simply not do it.
Right, listener, if you think the occasional unannounced gaps in episodes are bad now, you should see what this would be like if you were listening on our recording schedule.
If you didn't have a buffer, what you would be getting is daily tweet updates about the status of my Wi-Fi.
Mm-hmm. It would be a problem. So we're here. We're going to talk about the Chalet School.
We are.
And we're going to perform a deeply ridiculous pseudo-chemical analysis of the Chalet School.
Yes, which I was quite clear that if it came up when I was rolling, I would be rolling again because I don't understand it.
Right.
Even though I made you understand postmodernism.
Yeah, this is my fault and my problem. So I think I'm going to briefly explain the mode of analysis, and then I'm going to ask you to summarize the concept of the Chalet School for us. The plot doesn't particularly matter for the analysis, so if you've forgotten it, that's fine.
It's quite forgettable plot-wise. Not because it's bad, but because the plot is truly not the point.
Correct. So the particular school of analysis that we are stealing from chemistry and pretending that you can do literature with is called retrosynthetic analysis, which is essentially you take the thing and you take off pieces that you can identify and that you know how to put on again and see what's left and repeat. Yeah, the idea is you start from something you want to make and conceptually break it down into a series of pieces, like working backward from the end. And then to actually make it, you reverse those steps. Think of, for instance, a bakery product. I like lemon tart, so we will arbitrarily consider the lemon tart.
I'm considering.
Because a hypothetical lemon tart, it has a dusting of sugar on top. That's clearly the last thing that goes on, right? So we'll take that off.
Yeah.
That's the last step in what will be our synthetic pathway for lemon tart. Now we've got naked lemon tart.
Yep.
Which we can split into lemon custard and a pastry case. Then we can break the custard down. So that's a set of ingredients and a process for combining them. And then separately, reverse engineer the pastry case. How do you get a pastry case? Well, you blind bake a raw pastry case. Okay. How do you get a raw pastry case? Well, you roll out the pastry and you fit it into a tin. Great. How do you make raw pastry? And if you do this for long enough, eventually you end up with a set of ingredients, all of which you can just go out and buy.
Okay.
The chemistry version of ingredients is things like sodium hydroxide or ethanol.
Sure. In much the same way that I would, for example, get a salad I like in a restaurant and try to construct it at home.
Right.
From my understanding of the things that I could taste and see.
Right, exactly. And the food version is you go back until you hit things like flour. Unless you're doing like really artisanal stuff and you start with a field of spelt. And,
right.
But that most of the time you don't need to do that.
Whereas I imagine with a chemical process, you would be looking for sort of the same structure of breaking something down until you get to base ingredients, but the base ingredients are somewhat more esoteric.
Right. And there's the slightly complicated step of quite often, in order to take something off, you put something simpler on, and then when you do your synthetic step, you take your complicated thing with a simple thing sticking on the end, and a second complicated thing. And the simple thing falls off in the reaction and gets replaced by the complex thing. But that's like not a detail we particularly need to worry about. It's just that you're doing a reaction rather than strict addition. Sometimes you take things off, but that's details. There is a lot of prior knowledge involved in this. It's not a kind of analysis you can do from first principles. You have to start with a lot of understanding about things you can make molecules do if you tickle them right. I don't really have the level of knowledge of literature required to do the equivalent, but that's fine, because fortunately it is extremely silly to try and apply retrosynthetic analysis to a book in the first place. So there is no right answer for me to miss.
It's always good. It's one of the advantages of literature. And while I have now realised, forgot to introduce ourselves at the top of the episode.
We did.
We can add now that, in addition to your name, listeners can also learn your background in chemistry.
Yes. Hello, listener. My name is Duck. My pronouns are he, they. And I have an undergraduate degree in chemistry. And I was extremely excited when they introduced me to retrosynthetic analysis in about halfway through my degree, because it's like jigsaw
Because
puzzles.
you're a nerd.
But because I'm a nerd. Because it tickles my brain in the right way. I'm like, this is the best form of intellectual puzzle I've ever met. This is great fun. What if I just did this to everything?
Interesting, because that's how I felt when we started studying scansion.
Yeah, I could see that, actually. Yeah.
I was the only person in my class because this is my background. So, hello, listener. I'm Dia. I use they, them pronouns, and I have 2 master's degrees in comparative and medieval literature, respectively.
Mm-hmm.
My equivalent brain puzzle is when I was in GCSE Latin classes, they gave us like a taster of A-level work. And one of the things they showed us was, if you choose to do A-level, one of the things you'll start is you get a little tiny bit of scansion, which is working out where the meter is in poetry. I think that was the number one thing that turned people in my class off doing Latin. Was scansion's really it's like you have to look at the combinations of existing syllables and consonants and spaces, and you have a set number of long and short beats, and you have to work out which order they can and can't go in.
Yes.
Lots of people who are literature-minded hate it.
Yeah, it's the same thing as, like, if you're trying to write in English classic iambic pentameter.
Yeah.
Rather than just thinking about normal grammatical problems of what do the words mean, you now have to worry about how long the words are, and also where the stresses fall within the words. And sometimes you have to flip your grammar on its head to make the counting work.
And the thing I really like about doing this with classical or dead languages in general is when you do this in English, you just know, right? Like, you just know that you can't... Some words you can move the stress around a little bit and it still makes sense. Mm-hmm. So if you're desperate, you can say poetry. And people will let you get away with it. Whereas you couldn't, for example, say poetry. That sounds more wrong.
Yeah.
You know that in your soul because you're a native English speaker. Whereas if you're a second language speaker, you can remember where the beats are. So if I'm speaking French, I know that it's bonjour, not bonjour. It's not like that heavy emphasis.
Yeah, no.
Or bonjour, which is what English people usually get wrong.
Oh, is that what I've been doing wrong all this time?
With a dead language, you can't even do that because you haven't heard it spoken, even if you've been learning it for years.
Yes, you're inherently having to do it intellectually rather than just by, well, I know how to say this word.
And people hate this. My A-level Latin teacher gave us a year-long, she told us at the beginning of the year, you only have 2 points for scansion in the exam, but most people don't even bother with them. So I want you to get really good at them so you can get those 2 points everyone else misses. So
these can be not free, but points that put you over someone else.
Yes. So every single week, your homework is to do as much scansion of the text I've assigned you as you can bear. Just stop when you can't do it. And I will mark it every week until you're all good at it. And after 3 weeks, she told me to stop.
Is this because you were just sufficiently good at it that you didn't need the practice?
No, it was because I was handing her like 4 to 5 pages of scansion to mark every week.
It turns out that how much you could bear was too much.
It was more than she could bear. She didn't want to mark like 5 pages of work every week.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I can understand this.
This is why I'm actually, while I wouldn't want to do it myself, I'm very excited to play match the dots puzzles with literature. I think discovering new ways of looking at literature from a sort of analytical perspective is just fun.
Yes, for me this works as a sort of cousin to the TV tropes analysis we did. TV tropes, you're starting with the end thing and saying, what features does this have? The lemon tart is lemony and soft with crunchy bits and so forth.
And you might say that other things such as salmon are also lemony, despite being very different.
Share this trait. This is, rather than taking this finished product and saying what features does it have, is dismantling it for parts.
Yes. as opposed to the archaeological reading, where we devoted half of it to a material culture's archaeological reading
Uh-huh.
and half to a literary culture's archaeological reading, which was more along the lines of what existing texts had there to have been for this to be created.
Yes.
Which
Whereas
is, Food Wars could not be the first anime ever created because it references other animes.
Right, exactly. Whereas this sort of thing, I'm breaking it down to one set of text that you could sort of add up to get the Chalet School. There are other possible sets that you could add up the same way. You could get those pieces from other places. That would be equally valid. I'm not making any assertion that this is where they really came from, just that this is where you could find those to put them in. So, listener, if you've got a better suggestion of synthetic components, please email us. I would love to see your diagrams.
You've sufficiently demystified retrosynthetic for our audience.
Would you like to tell us what the Chalet School is?
So, in its simplest form, the Chalet School is a ridiculously long series of books. I think there's like 60 of them.
58, yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's also a set of side ones that I didn't look into at all.
The author wrote upwards of 100 books. Yeah.
Yeah. I only know that these side ones exist because some of them have very confusing names because they're from like a decade later, and you're just like, they let Asian people into this extremely white school in Austria. But I didn't look into those particularly. I did read the first one. I had previously read the second one. I think I read as a kid. So Chalet School is one of the grand tradition of sort of school books. You know, these have existed pretty much forever. The Chalet School ones in specific are a little bit unusual, and they focus a bit more on the adults, or at least the early ones do. I'm given to understand the later ones are a bit more true to format.
I'll believe this. I think I've only read the first 3 or 4.
I
read the first one repeatedly as a child.
I read the second one once and essentially deemed it inferior to St. Clair's and didn't read anymore. I liked the St. Clair's books by Enid Blyton. I think they're the only one of these school books that I religiously read every single one of, but I did read a variety of one-offs in all the other series.
Yeah, I read a couple of other school books. I couldn't name them now.
Yeah, the books describe the decision. So there's 2 siblings, Madge and Dick, who have been left sort of what in the time was a reasonable amount of money to be left, but not enough to never have to do anything about it.
Yes, they've received a reasonable inheritance, but not retirement money.
Yeah. And so obviously Dick is a man in the 20s, so he can just walk into any building and say, please let me have a job. Madge has to be a little bit more calculating. So what she decides is she's going to move to Austria, where it's got a cheaper cost of living. There's lots of cheap land. And it's also been medically recommended for their I don't recall if we're told why, unwell in some manner, sister Jo.
Yeah, what the text gives us is basically that she was never particularly strong and healthy, and then she had a bout of some kind of fever disease. Which has essentially left her with bad asthma and a tendency to fatigue and catch anything going.
Yeah, it's, it's tuberculosis chic era of just generally ill and posh ill, not poor people ill.
Yes.
So she's going to go to Austria, she's going to buy up some land and buildings, and she's going to start a school for girls there. A boarding school aimed at English girls, but allowing girls from all over the world, and by the world I mean Europe and maybe America. Yes. I think there are later some Australian girls there.
That would track. Yeah, this is a school for people whose parents are taking 6-month holidays in the Austrian Alps level of class people. Yeah. She is also willing to teach the locals if they have the money for school fees and don't mind being taught in English. But it's not aimed at people who are not already present. Yes,
and it's also stated in the book that this is a less academic school than the ones that an Austrian student in the village would be attending, because it's essentially a finishing school. It's not aimed at academia. Yeah, there is some teaching going on, but there are also hours upon hours of needlework.
Yeah, this is very much a boarding school along the lines of, well, you need to send your children somewhere.
Yeah.
The children have to be at a place where they are physically looked after. This is one of the options for your girls.
It's 1925. They don't need to learn anything.
There are no GCSEs.
It'll
It's
help them
fine.
out if they have a bit of French and they know how to cook a cake. So we'll teach them that,
Yes.
sure. But that's not the point of them being here.
No, the question of preparing the children for their university entrance exams is not on the table. That's a boys'
No.
school problem.
I think this is why I vastly preferred Sinclair's, in which, in several books, the idea of if you were intellectually considered insufficient, you might be sent to finishing school came up.
What you do when you failed. It's vocational school for rich girls.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the fact that it's sort of focused more on the creation of the school is sort of fun. I see why people enjoyed it. It does a little bit give Robinson Crusoe for good girls who wouldn't think about having adventures.
Yes, it's got a very Swallows and Amazons feel to it that way.
Yes, it's like, well, obviously you wouldn't like to fantasize about being on an island and getting sweaty or having to cut things and cook
But what if you
things
were
over a
slightly
fire.
roughing it in a nice chalet in the Alps and you had to like sweep the mud off the floors and hang
come up
new
with a
little
curriculum.
curtains? Yeah. And work out where all the beds were going to go in the big attic.
And like it definitely appeals to like people who, if they'd been born 100 years later, would have been like Sims YouTubers.
Yes. Honestly, Chalet School Sims would probably be great.
It would be great. I'd read it. Well, not read it. You know what I mean. I'd engage with it, whatever format it came in.
You'd play the Chalet School DLC.
Yeah, hey, I played plenty of Zoo Tycoon in primary school.
And I can't judge you for that because that
Boarding
sounds
school Tycoon
very
would
fun.
rock.
Honestly, what is Dwarf Fortress but a form of boarding school?
I mean, there is a plot, but there also isn't. Like, the plot is just a series of things that go wrong in the first creation of and then attraction of girls to this school.
Yeah, it's essentially the first couple of terms, a sequence of events happens.
Yeah.
If they didn't happen, different events could happen. It's that sort of thing. Like, stuff does occur, but it is mostly slice of life setting up a boarding school.
Yeah, it's quite charming. Like I said, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it as an adult, but if you have the kind of child or are the kind of child that likes these kinds of like sort of slice of life sweet books without much stakes, easy living, but still a little taste of adventure, it's a good example of the genre.
Yes. Yeah, and I think if you are giving it to your children, the time difference actually probably now makes it slightly more than just a like it's not nutrition free intellectually speaking, because there is a certain degree of, well, why is this happening? Well, because it's 100 years ago.
Yeah.
But you do have to it can prompt a certain amount of thinking through things being different 100 years ago.
Yeah, like if you have an 8 to 12-year-old who likes Anne of Green Gables and like
Yeah, absolutely.
Mallory Towers, they'll
Mallory
probably
Towers,
enjoy this.
those were the ones that I read some of.
I also found them inferior to Sinclair's. I was a loyalist. Despite them being functionally the same books.
Right. These are not. There's a reason that you can write 58 of these little things, because they are
It gets
not
to the point where even within the same
sagas.
series, they have the same adventures over and over again.
Yes, I mean, even in book one, there are 2 instances of climbing a mountain and getting caught short by the weather.
Yeah.
It happens twice to different groups.
I don't know if it's the final one, because I think there were a couple. There were like the last couple were written by different people, and I can't remember if this is the final one that was written by Enid Blyton, or like the last one that was written by someone else.
Mhm.
But one of the last St. Clair's books is literally the plot of the first book happens, but to the first years, and now the original first years are in their final year and like observing it and helping them out. It's like,
That's
wow,
cute.
that's
but
cute.
Also,
But
you
wow.
ran out of ideas
You
several books
go
ago.
out of ideas.
Yeah, this is not epic sagas. It just goes on for a long time.
We talked about Warrior Cats. I think we
Very
said Warrior
related.
Cats.
Yeah.
There's an age group where, and I think it's like, it sounds like sort of mean to say this, but I think it's true of like a lot of types of book. There is a period you go through as a child or a young teenager where you are just voraciously consuming more of this, way more than an adult has the capacity to do. Like,
Yes, absolutely.
adults do this too. Adults watch a good movie and go, I want to see more movies like that. Kids do it at like lightning speed because their personality is still developing and they're trying to assimilate the things that are going to make them the kind of person they become.
Yeah.
And that means that whereas an adult might go, I quite enjoyed Iron Man. I think I'll watch Iron Man 2. a 12-year-old will go, I quite enjoyed the Chalet School. I think I will read all 50 of them.
Yeah, like the Redwall books for me, it's like as an adult, I might read a book of that sort of cozy adventure nature every couple of years. As a child, I like discovered Redwall and was like, oh, there's 12 of these. I'm now going to read all of them.
Yeah.
As fast as I can get my hands on them, one after another.
I think this is also like this is why I actually really defend copy the leader YA trends.
Mm-hmm.
Where Hunger Game comes out and then there's 4,000
Right,
which
but the kids
faction are you in
genuinely would like
dystopian
to read
future?
6 more Hunger Games.
Yeah, don't get me wrong, it is a bit of a cash grab, but it's also serving a genuine desire, which is like, yeah, people wanted to read the Hunger Games again but different 50 times in a row.
This is also why fanfiction exists.
This is also why fanfiction exists.
Because we want more of this thing until you are sated. You're not always sated in your desire for thisness by the first
It's also
thing.
why, sort of the extended universe things are actually really hard to pull off, because a lot of people especially people who have never worked in either YA or fandom, don't understand how to do the same but different. They either do the same but the same, or different but different.
Yes, it's not enough to just plug the names into whatever you were going to do anyway. You have to have quite a grasp of how to mimic voice and tone and theme.
So how to make breaks from those things in ways that are genuinely engaging. Like, this is the thing that I think comic books do really well and comic book movies completely fail at, which is you can actually do this week Spider-Man is a horror story and then 2 weeks later it's a sitcom.
Yes.
Because people understand after 60 years or whatever, people have got on their heads about which bits of Spider-Man are inalienable Spider-Man and which bits of Spider-Man you can pick and choose to suit your preferences.
We're coming up on a theological theory of literature where a work has accidents and essentials.
Yeah.
And to do more of it, to do extended universe or to do good fan fiction, because we must admit there is bad fan fiction.
There's really bad fan
You
fiction.
have to be able to change the accidentals whilst maintaining the essence.
Yeah, it's why I'm endlessly fascinated by migratory / fandom, which, for listeners who aren't aware, is the sort of online nickname for people who will just watch whatever is currently popular, identify the 2 male characters with the sort not even necessarily the best chemistry, like the simplest chemistry.
Yes.
And just migrate those 2 characters into their pre-existing type of story that they like to read and write.
Yes.
And
you get the flush of your standard coffee shop AUs and specific ways of writing sex scenes that are very recognizable as the fanfic / fic ways of doing sex scenes and things like this.
The towing off of shoes.
Tongues battling for dominance.
Yeah. But this isn't I think some people hear about this and aren't familiar with it and go, well, that's just people being horny and uncreative. And I'm like, no, I'm disputing that lots of people are horny and uncreative, but people are horny and uncreative everywhere. This isn't a specific problem to / fandom. What people who are into migratory / fandom are into is a style of writing and a community.
Yes. Yes.
It's no different than people who subscribe to analog.
Right. It's no different really to being a comics fan.
Yeah.
If you are into superhero comics, you might check out the new superhero comic where you wouldn't check out other things. Migratory / fandom is the same thing. If here are stories written in that style you like with the content that you like, but new ones. It's just a source of new content for a particular kind of storytelling.
And another
which, yes, is quite often horny.
Like comics and like migratory / fandom is people who like to read stories about well-bred English girls at boarding school having hijinks.
Yes, starting little school magazines and playing pranks on each other and forgetting about their French homework. Having friend breakups.
The excitement of the nearest horse they can potentially ride.
Yeah, they saw some girls walking past and now they're going to spend all afternoon gossiping about whether those girls will come to the school.
Being sent snacks from home.
Yeah.
Playing pranks on teachers, a thing which is ubiquitous in these books and I would never have dreamed of.
Never happened in my experience.
Oh my god, I don't even remember people playing practical jokes on each other.
No, bullying is more straightforward than pranksterism. There was plenty of physical bullying, but I don't remember any we have actually carefully set up little tricks and traps.
Yeah, like that just seems
good-hearted
like a big
way.
time investment. I think it might be a boarding school thing when you're just like there and bored a lot.
I think you're stuck. I think you are trapped in a room and bored a lot at boarding school. Yes.
Yeah, like before we get into a like deeper analysis than what we've started already, I should say I was a scholarship kid at a very fancy private school.
Mhm.
And I was at the kind of school where we didn't do football or basketball because they were for boys, you know?
Did you do lacrosse?
My year didn't do lacrosse, but lacrosse was an option. We did
Ah,
hockey, tennis, dance, that kind of thing.
I love that hockey is a girl's sport because hockey is a
Hockey's
sport
so
where you run
violent.
full tilt, armed with 3 foot of solid wood at each other's knees.
It's really violent.
It's
There
very
were
rough.
2 girls in my class alone who lost teeth. And
People
I'm
get
talking
really hurt
adult
playing
teeth.
hockey because you are beating each other up with sticks some of the time.
And also because you're teenage girls, so none of you wear your mouth guard because it makes you look goofy and everyone laughs at you.
It makes your mouth look funny, so you don't do that. Yeah,
Yeah.
this is
There was
why for
a
roller
girl in my
derby.
year who got smacked in the head with a hockey puck and like was fine for an hour and then passed out in physics and smashed her head in on a fume cupboard.
This is
She ate
why.
soup for months.
But this is why in roller derby, before they start a bout, they make both teams line up and check their safety gear, including are you wearing your mouth guards?
Yes.
Show me your
Because
wrist pads.
otherwise, they will. I don't know about roller derby professionals, but I can tell you that teenage girls definitely will not.
Right.
Because it's mildly uncomfortable and makes you look silly.
Have you got your wrist guards on the right way around? Are you wearing your elbow pads? Show me your mouth guard. Because people will skip safety steps. It's, inevitable. They don't do a lot of sport at the Chalet School.
They don't. I think this is the period where it was considered that the only purpose for girls to do sport was to get fresh outdoor air. And since they're in Austria, they're getting that anyway.
Yeah, I think they talk about starting up games, by which they seem to mainly mean tennis.
Yes, tennis was one of the ones that were fine. I think small amounts of physical exertion were understood to be necessary, but it was a good 5 years before it was considered that any amount of running was like required
Yes, no, they
for children
go
to be
on.
healthy.
They go on daily walks of a fair distance. Actually, they seem to be walking several miles a day.
Yeah,
Just
sort of
because they
long
need to get their
walks,
exercise.
tennis, and for particularly athletic girls, riding or netball, I think were sort of the
Yeah.
available options. Netball hated by everyone who went to an all-girls school in this country, by the way.
It's like basketball but genteel.
It's like basketball if you weren't allowed to do anything fun.
For our American listeners who are not familiar with netball, it is standing still basketball.
Yeah, it's basketball, but you're not allowed to run with the ball, and you're not allowed to dribble the ball, and you're not allowed to leave your section of the court.
Yeah. It's basketball with territory zoning rules and mandatory stoppages.
Apocryphally, I believe this is actually like an exaggeration, but I was always told at school that the creation of netball was a English school teacher wrote to some American college coach asking for the rules of basketball so that she could adapt them for young ladies. And she either misunderstood or chose to misunderstand the outlinings of the court as sort of areas that the players couldn't move between.
If you've ever wanted to experience for yourself what it's like to be a war game figurine that could only move a certain distance per turn, that's netball.
Yep. And because you can't run with the ball or move with the ball at all, it makes it... basketball already gives tall people an advantage because obviously you're trying to throw things at things that are up high. Yeah. With netball, if you have the ball, the way to get it off you is people come and stand with their arm directly above your head. Because and that's a lot easier if you're a foot taller.
Yeah, anyone who doesn't have the ball can move around freely. So you literally just go and like form a wall and prevent the person with the ball from doing anything with it.
And if you're short, they will simply stand directly above you and you can do nothing. You are simply trapped.
It's a very particular
silly sport.
Right. I quite liked it as a child, but I'm not going to defend it as a sensible athletic.
I didn't necessarily enjoy it. I liked that it was one of the sports I was good at because I was fairly tall.
I wasn't good at it, but I did quite like it. Anyway.
We're going to get into a lot of posh English school talk, I suspect. So,
probably.
Start as we mean to go on.
Long series of slice of life boarding school books.
Yeah.
So, the first component I would like to remove from these books is the Second World War.
Yeah.
So the Chalet School was started in 1925 and finished in like the 1970s. And it was set in the present-day Europe of its time.
Didn't they move it?
Yes. They moved it first to Guernsey, which went great for them. And then they move it again to somewhere in the home counties.
Should we give an editor's note for Guernsey?
Yeah, Guernsey is one of the Channel Islands, which probably seemed very safe and lovely when they moved the school there, fictionally speaking, and then Guernsey got invaded by the Nazis because it's in the English Channel and occupied. It's the only, the Channel Islands are the only bit of British sort of mainland territory to be occupied by the Nazis, because they're practically in France.
Yeah.
They're islands in the English Channel. So the school got moved again because Guernsey got invaded by Nazis.
I would way have preferred the version where they were just still occupied
just
by
stayed
Nazis.
there. Yeah, and originally they're in the Austrian Alps, where obviously that's not a safe place, even
Also
for a
full of
fictional
Nazis.
school. Yeah. But the point is, because of when and where it's set, it incorporates the Second World War in its fictional events, which is not true of most school stories.
No, though I believe a lot of school story writers were drafted, not literally, though also literally, to sort of support the government's various PSA efforts. Like, well-known artists and authors and creatives were asked, like, hey, could you help people cope with this massive war that's killing everyone?
Yeah, but not usually by putting in your series of, like, by modern standards, like grade school books about school life.
No, it's a choice. It's definitely a choice.
Right. So we can identify that. We can isolate that as a specific part of the Chalet School that we can sort of take it in or put it out.
Yep.
So that's our first synthetic component, the Second World War. Strictly speaking, what we should now do is go on and break that component down into its own constituent parts. Well, the Second World War is a pretty complex thing. Shouldn't really stop your analysis at something that big, but we're going to, because this is an entertainment podcast.
Let's not do the entire Second World War.
No,
I've got dinner plans, mate.
I am not going to try to analyse the causes and mechanisms of World War II.
I think that's a good call.
Right, we're going to do the other thing that you can do in one of these analyses, and we're going to say, we're just going to buy that in.
Right.
World War II is readily available.
If you can't make your own World War II, store-bought is fine.
Store-bought is fine, there's no shortage of supply. We're going to get our World War II from a catalogue and just stick it into our proto-Chalet School at the end.
Yep.
This concludes our discussion of World War II. I am not analysing it. Go to a historian for that. Okay, next step. Are you familiar with the Frances Hodgson Burnett novel, The Little Princess?
I am. It was a childhood favourite.
Likewise, which I reread it. I didn't ask you to because it was a minor part of the analysis, but I reread it for this. It's a lot shorter than I remember.
I actually have reread it recently-ish because I've been on a real classics kick and I've been mixing them up with the odd bit of children's classics to refresh my mind.
Yeah, it's shorter than I remember. It's quite fun. It is part of the canon of English literature for children.
Yes. It's like most of the ones that have female main characters, it is part of the canon of English literature for children, but sort of despite having a female main character, which we didn't decide to segregate books about girls and books about boys until like the 30s or whatever.
Yeah, although I suspect nowadays it is more of a books you give your girl to read than...
Yeah, I think we're maybe not... or at the very least, we might give it to boys, but it's considered acceptable for boys not to have read it, whereas girls not to have read it is actually quite surprising.
Yeah, why have you skipped that? There is a particular structural piece of the Chalet School that pretty well matches The Little Princess.
Yeah.
So there are differences in the plot. I don't want to suggest this is exactly the same story.
No, it's got a lot of differences just in terms of stakes, for example.
Right. But the
and
particular
events continuing from one another in sequence.
Right. But as part of the timeline of Sarah, the protagonist of A Little Princess, her life, she's a schoolgirl. She's left in the care of a boarding school. She is then suddenly orphaned and taken on by the school as like a junior teacher, as a combination act of charity and getting cheap labour.
Mm-hmm.
This is the same structure as the story of Juliet, one of the minor characters in the first book of the Chalet School.
Juliet's treatment is considerably better because...
Right, it's actually a reversal.
The Little Princess, in this, the teachers are the heroes.
Yeah, it's just like a mirror-flipped thing, which is sometimes the thing you can do in chemistry. So in A Little Princess, you've got a loving father and a cruel, exploitative school. And in the Chalet School, Juliet's father is the villain and the school is loving.
Mm.
So I think this is another component I'm going to sort of pick out and remove that. It's not the main storyline, but it's a piece of what's going on.
Yeah.
and a similar borrowing of pieces to talk about, and a similar classic work of children's literature. I've gone with works that predate the Chalet School on purpose because I think
This
it's more
makes
fun
sense.
that way.
Yes.
So another classic of children's literature is Little Women,
Yes.
which you've probably read because it's a classic of children's literature.
Unlike A Little Princess, not since I was a child, but yes.
Yeah. So Little Women follows the lives of 4 sisters who have some slightly mawkish problems around family illness and flirting with the boy next door.
Mm-hmm.
There's a part 2, which was published separately in the UK, so I read it as a separate book called Good Wives, really putting the moral lesson on the cover there. But they all get married.
When I was trying to find a copy, because I couldn't get a copy of the Chalet School at my local library, so I had to go to some internet archive, etc. And while I was looking for it, I stumbled across a couple of reviews, and I found several reviews from Americans specifically saying like it's not bad, but it's very weird to me reading this because the sort of very old classic children's books that I grew up with were Anna Green Gables, Little Women, books like that are very focused on the importance of girls' education.
Yeah.
But have sequels where they simply settle down and become wives, and the ones who were really educated also become teachers.
Yes.
Whereas the English books tend to not give a flying toss about girls' education, but also are much less interested in boys, much less interested in the whole matchmaking and matrimony thing.
Yes.
I think it's just where feminism was at, respectively, at the time and place of each of these books' publication. But it is sort of interesting that I don't necessarily think either of those is better or worse, but it is very noticeable as a trend.
Yes. Yeah, partly because of the boys, the American ones tend not to be school stories in the same way. And what the aspect of your segregated boarding school story is, it means...
Americans have a very different idea about boarding schools.
Do they?
Yeah, I mean, especially modern day America, you only really hear about boarding schools as like military school type boarding schools or those absolute hippie ones. There's no real in between. I'm not aware of Americans having like public schoolboy boarding schools.
Yeah,
like the Eatons and the charter houses.
Yeah, they're very much a thing here, and it's not just for the very aristocratic people who go off to Eton and places. It's specifically enculturating how to be a ruling aristocrat. But we also have this whole layer of, if you have the money where you want to be doing travelling and just generally not bothering about your children, you can send them to boarding school.
Like boarding schools here start as like young as 3 or so.
Yeah, you can send them off very young.
You can send people to boarding school when they're nursery aged.
Yeah, basically as soon as they're weaned.
And they still do. I've like known people who were sent off to boarding school as soon as they could toddle.
Yeah, it's
and those people were not well adjusted.
No, it's very much not a thing that the lower classes do.
No, because it's clearly unhinged.
Right, but rich people can do unhinged things sometimes because they're allowed. But
and we have all kinds of arcane rituals specifically associated with those boarding schools.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
A lot of which people seem to think were invented for the Harry Potter series.
No, Harry Potter has no original pieces.
No. Oh, imagine the world if there was a fagging system at Hogwarts.
Yeah, the house elves really robbed us of that.
That's why they have house elves, because otherwise they would have to use the children as servants.
That is an interesting dark AU.
And then there would be like Americans who thought that J.K. Rowling had invented this as like a cutesy twee system, and we'd have to be like, no,
that's real.
The child slaves are real.
The child slavery is real.
It's a time-honoured and treasured tradition of our highest echelons of society.
The fanfic writers were saying, and what if this was also non-consensually sexual between the children? Also, did not make that up. That's a real thing that happens at British boarding schools.
Yeah, it's called fagging.
It's called fagging. Officially, what you're supposed to do is like help clean their rooms and stuff.
Specifically, I believe, I could be wrong about this, specifically it comes from you, the younger boys are supposed to serve the older boys and specifically build up their fire with wooden logs, which is why it's called fagging, because you have to go and get their fags.
Yep, that would make sense.
Faggot being a term for a small piece of wood.
Yep, bundle of sticks.
Oh, my dad went to school. My dad very briefly went to a school that practiced fagging when he was between schools, because it used to be a thing that you could do. Is if you were in certain occupations, you could get like a very brief scholarship for various boarding schools.
Yeah.
And when my dad's parents were moving house, because his dad was, I believe, a police officer, it was a school for. It could have been publicans, I don't know. But like you could go for like 2 months to a very expensive boarding school
Just
while your parents got things together.
Yeah.
And like your parents' union would pay for it or whatever. So for about 2 months, my dad went to a school that practiced fagging. He was not a
Yeah.
fan.
Yeah, it's bizarre. It's a combination of you are assigned to an older boy like as their menial servant, and they are assigned to you as your personal bully.
Yeah.
It's
I think they're supposed to like.
I think you're supposed to treat each other with respect and learn about responsibility and
This thing is, I think when I first encountered this in children's books, I assumed the older student was like supposed to mentor you in some manner, but that doesn't appear to be true.
doesn't appear to be the case.
I don't think that happens.
It's a system literally designed for cycles of abuse.
Yeah, it's just to teach you that this is how you treat people with no power.
Right. It's to give you some grudges to take out on people in your turn. It's very strange.
Yeah.
Um,
It's how we beat the empathy out of boys we're going to send off to run the empire.
yes. Literally, yes. If people understood what Eton does to the ruling class, they would burn it down.
Oh god, yeah. Like it's like how every time somebody tries to make a Wikipedia page for Eton sex scandals, it gets deleted immediately.
Right. But yes, this system of assigning you to an older boy who you are not allowed to disobey. There are sex scandals associated with this, unfortunately. Humans are predictable in some ways.
And also, like, teenage boys don't have a fully developed sense of, like, their own personhood, let alone that of others.
And it was done to them.
And it was done to them.
It's all a bad idea.
Meanwhile, at the girls' school, they did actually have fagging at girls' schools. I don't believe it appears in the Chalet School. But it was a thing. I believe they weren't called fags in girls' schools.
That would not surprise me. It's very, very common for the boys and girls' schools, which, although they sort of happen simultaneously, have always been fairly separate traditions. Girls' schools were invented in a sort of copying of boys' schools, but then had very little to do with them on a day-to-day basis.
Yes.
So they have got
while the boys are learning how to commit human rights abuses,
yep.
The girls are also probably committing some human rights abuses with the fagging, but they're not doing the fagging to teach them anything. They're doing it because it's what the boys' schools do.
Right,
they're mostly learning needlecraft and French.
Needlecraft, French, dancing. They're going on long, healthy walks. They're having the slang trained out of them.
Yeah.
The reason I bring up Little Women is that there is a third book called Little Men.
There is.
Where the not pretty but interesting looking, intelligent, self-reliant sister, who has by this point married a big German bear, which good for her, starts a boarding school.
There is, yes.
Hers is a boys' school, and it's doing some sort of less traditional educational approaches. It's doing the of-the-time experimental educational stuff, which the Chalet School isn't. The Chalet School is just doing this, what was for its time, ordinary stuff. But Jo March, in founding this school, is not unlike our school founding Chalet School headmistress Madge.
Did read, I don't think I ever read Good Wives. I did read Little Men and hated it as a child.
I read it, I don't recall what I felt about it.
I definitely remember being disappointed by it compared to Little Women.
I mean, that's fair. It spends an awful lot of time talking about schoolboys instead of Jo.
Yeah.
Which, why are you here if you're not interested in Jo? But the name, so the founding of the school goes to Madge, and some of the sort of personality stuff goes to Madge, and then the name Jo and the tomboyishness, which is the other like memorable thing about Jo March, goes to our younger Bethany sister Joey.
Yes.
Who also gets being sickly, which otherwise belongs to Beth.
Yes. And I think in a way sort of counteracts the tomboyishness, which was a lot less accepted in British girls. And you can see this in how, like, the tomboy characters in later Enid Blyton novels, while they're fine because they're very rich and they get away with it, they are not treated particularly well by other people.
No, but honestly, both the tomboyishness and the sickliness for Joey in the Chalet School are fairly informed attributes. They only pop up when it's relevant for events.
Yes, they only pop up when it's to cause a sequence of plot events.
Yes. And being in the mountain air almost entirely cures Joey, whereas Beth dies.
No amount of sea air could cure her.
No. I think that was like, a good writing decision, was to not kill off Joey. Do not kill off your 12-year-old protagonist if you want to write a light-hearted children's book.
Especially not if you want to write 50 more of these.
Right. Killing off the school child in book 1 of 50. Fascinating choice. Would love to see it done.
Yeah. Bold move.
Not gonna suggest though, not a light-hearted boarding school story anymore.
No, I think there's a Mallory Towers where somebody dies, isn't there?
Probably.
I think there's one where somebody like goes home sick, and then all of the other. It's a new girl, so you're not emotionally
Oh
attached
yeah,
to
yeah.
her.
We brought her in, and then we sent her home sick, and then she never come back.
Yeah, I think it's
Makes
Mallory
sense.
Towers. I did read a lot of these as a kid, and I only remember which ones belonged to which series if I really liked them.
Yeah. So, Chalet School, minus World War II, minus A Little Princess, minus Little Men, gets us down to kind of the skeleton of a novel. We're now down to like the idea of a school story.
Yeah.
So we're going to pull out Tom Brown's School Days, which more or less originates
Okay.
the genre. Like
Interesting.
Tom Brown's School Days is one of the very first and certainly one of the first like big popular examples of a boarding school story.
Okay.
And a lot of the structural stuff of we're going to have the kids having some adventures, we're going to talk about their classes but not really focus on anything they might be learning in them, we're going to be focused on the relationships they have with the other students and their friendships, and we're going to like bring kids in partway through the year to highlight to provoke change in the existing relationships. All of that kind of stuff is essentially genre convention, and a lot of it is started by Tom Brown's School Days.
Yeah.
Which I have read, and do not give it to your children. It really goes hard on the institutionalized bullying through the fagging system in a way that I don't think is suitable for most kids.
This is fair, yeah.
And then we're left with some odd little bits. So one of them is there's a bit about Joey's very sickly and she gets cured by the healthy mountain air.
Yes.
Going outdoors and eating healthily was a bit of a cure-all for European medicine for a long time.
I mean, to be fair, we were making most of our houses out of poison.
Well, this is the thing. It's this thing. If you go down to the sea or you go up to the mountains, and you definitely don't go to India, because what you need is you need healthy outside air and simple, wholesome food. And it wasn't a bad treatment, which is not because outside air and rustic cheese actually cure anything, but because industrial cities are just really bad places to live.
Yeah.
Just
like not being next to a coal factory and a house full of arsenic
right,
will
exactly.
cure a lot of problems.
Get away from the coal smoke and from milk that is mostly chalk, and go and breathe some oxygen and eat some food that is not fake.
Get the sawdust out of your bread, yep.
Right, it's pretty good for everyone. Patent medicine is like laudanum and arsenic, it's bad for you. The doctors are not always helping.
We haven't really come up with washing our hands after surgery yet.
Right.
Let alone before.
The medicine's terrible, there's smog, the water's filthy, the food is sawdust. This all contributes to this thing where you can kind of casually put in your book that this child has a chronic cough and is easily exhausted and catches everything going. And we move them to the Austrian Alps and now they're cured.
Yes.
And everyone just accepts, like, this is just normal. You don't have to justify this.
It's not like The Secret Garden where it does have to be explained because we are...
Right, in The Secret Garden, he's a hypochondriac, essentially.
He's a hypochondriac, and also we're given to understand that he's had all manner of treatments because the fundamental problem is in fact spiritual. He feels sick all the time because his life sucks.
Yes, his actual problem is grief.
Yeah. And
the cure for grief turns out to be friendship and going outdoors, which, honestly, works better for grief than tuberculosis.
Yeah.
Yeah, this stuff just makes sense to you. It makes sense to your readers. It also means you can then put the child in a 3-day coma because they got cold.
Yeah.
Like physically, not got a cold, I mean got chilled on a mountain before they were rescued.
We can't judge. I'd say a lot of people still think this is how colds work.
Right. PSA, you do need to be exposed to some germs. You do not get a cold just from being cold.
Yes, and yet, if you have wet hair in the vicinity of anyone over the age of 60...
Vince, they'll make you catch something, yes.
Not how that works. Of cold.
Yeah, the part about the chronic, maybe asthma being cured by getting away from coal smoke, totally plausible. 3-day coma because you got cold and it made your brain fever recur. Not really, medically, how that works. But seemed reasonable at the time to both the author and the reader.
Yeah.
So our synthesis here includes just a little dash, just for flavour, of early medicine and the Industrial Revolution. Just a little bit. Which is probably also where we get, like, there's a train crash in the book where no one is hurt. And And the book is just generally quite excited about trains and train travel and paddle steamers.
There's a bit of railway children in it.
A little bit. Just, big machines, still very exciting. We were not yet in the phase where culturally we like to pretend that they're not machines and make them as quiet and hidden as possible and just be like, here is a pure white renderite box with no features, and you sit in it in perfect silence, and then you are where you're going. That we were still at the point of, we're going to show the pistons because they look cool.
Yeah. Correct, frankly.
Right.
Like, I wouldn't want to have to do, like, a Zoom call on a Victorian steam engine, but...
No, but they do look better.
If I'm just on a little journey to the seaside, steam engine every day.
Absolutely. There's also a running, like, background thread of, like, how Prussians, specifically Prussians, are terrible and rude and fat, and the Tyrolese peasantry are wholesome, simple people. The Italians are, like, a little bit shady, and the French are fussy, and the English are the best people, and they're very sensible and honest and forthright.
Yes, though the Austrians think that our education sucks.
The Austrians are like, do you do maths? And the English are like, no. The Austrians are like, could you do maths? We think it would be better if the children learned to count.
And they're just like, but they're women.
They're women. They need to learn to look nice in tennis shoes.
They'll have people for counting.
Right. But there's all these, like, standard English stereotypes about Europe from 1925.
Yeah.
They're all still pretty recognizable.
Yeah.
We've
stopped talking about Prussians, I guess, because...
Right. We stopped talking about Prussians because Prussians don't exist anymore. But we used to talk about Germans and make a distinction between the Bavarian German and the, Stern German.
They're all national stereotypes that don't make sense to anyone who's not of the nation that already has that stereotype.
Right, exactly. This is just like something in the water. It's a little less an ingredient and more a contaminant we can't get rid of.
Yeah.
It's not even like racism exactly. It's like the step before racism. It's just the bit where your culture includes some beliefs about other cultures.
Yeah.
But it does tell you that this is an English author drawing on her own cultural belief. Like, if these were French children's books, the embedded stereotypes would be different.
Yeah.
They would have a different view of, at least, French and English people. They probably would have a different view of Italians. I have no idea what the French national stereotype of Italians is. I assume it has no reason to be the same as mine.
Seems right, yeah. I don't know enough about French stereotypes of Italians to disprove it.
What do the French think about the Germans? Probably something.
Yeah.
But what it is, I don't know. But I can read these books and recognise, yes, this is what English people think about Europeans.
It's like how Americans have the stereotype that French people are cowards that just isn't really here.
We don't really have that. We don't
have that one. Like, we'll join in to annoy the French, but we don't have that stereotype.
Annoying the French specifically is one of our cultural pastimes.
Yeah, like, we will absolutely join in on cheese-eating surrender monkeys jokes because it irritates French people, but it's not a thing we culturally believe about the French.
No, we actually believe that they are slightly better and classier than us in all ways and are judging us for it.
Yeah. It's like, I didn't know that Americans have a stereotype that French people don't use deodorant.
Huh.
Like, they all smell bad, and I was like, really? They have the best perfume.
Yeah.
They smell expensive.
I mean, there's a thing about garlic, but...
Yeah.
That's just South Europe in general.
We have a common language with Americans, but yeah, very different national stereotypes.
Yeah. This kind of feels to me like the same as there's a whole very funny thing about trying to get the kids not to use slang. And the reason it's now very funny is because you get some of their definitions of what is and isn't slang.
Yes. Oh my God.
And it's from 1925. So the narrative tells us that awful is slang, but horrid is proper English.
Yeah, it's like how if you look up early reviews of the Beatles, there were loads of people complaining that they said yeah in their songs instead of yes.
Right. Can you imagine the Beatles with like
she
proper
loves
elocution?
You, yes.
And also complaining they have long hair, and then you look at them with 2020's eyes, and you're like, they have short hair.
Yeah.
They do.
They just don't have a short back and sides.
Right. When you say long, you mean physically touching their ears.
Yeah.
You mean like not neatly trimmed, whereas I mean you can put it in a ponytail.
Yeah.
But so there's you could tell that this book was written in 1925. Being England in 1925 is here in the background of this book.
Yeah.
So to sum up, like the synthetic pathway that we've got back to create the Chalet School, take the concept of a novel. Like, I didn't go that far back because we have to draw the line somewhere, and I don't want to go all the way back to invent language, but just know that if you want to, you can run this back to the primordial ooze.
Of course you can.
But assuming you have got writing and printing and fiction books, start with that, and for your solvent, use 1925 in England.
Yeah.
Which is an industrial country with particular folk beliefs about medicine and a characteristic set of stereotypes about other cultures. Combine that skeleton novel with the functional group school story, as described in the groundbreaking work of Thomas Hughes, famous 19th century chemist, or indeed novelist. Take that, plus Little Women, plus A Little Princess, plus World War II equals the Chalet School.
Yeah.
Sound plausible?
See that? That seems plausible.
Anything else you want to throw in there as necessary pieces?
I do think, I mean, the thing that was interesting to me is that your example school story was Tom Brown's School Days, which is sort of like, I'm aware of it being super famous. I don't think I read them. What's sort of interesting to me is like there is a lot of gender in the way that school books are distinguished, because the first school story, that, as far as I'm aware, is The Governess, which is from the 1750s.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting that, like, very, very quickly, boys' school books overtook the genre.
Yes.
And
Tom Brown's School Days is the big famous one, and it had...
And it's the
codifier. Right, and in the same way as The Hunger Games gave rise to a whole new mini-genre.
Yeah.
So did Tom Brown's School Days.
But, like, and obviously this isn't really part of the analysis because it's a break from form, but the thing that's interesting to me kind of is the focus on the adults and the logistics and the setting up, because that's much more what something like The Governess or Little Men is about than, say, you know, Mallory Towers.
Right, for something like Mallory Towers, you haven't established. There is a school, it has been running since before we need to worry about it.
Yeah.
It has its own traditions, and then we follow the lives and academic careers of specific girls.
Yeah, because I think a lot of other sort of more typical... I don't want to say more typical because this is like archetypal, but I think the ones that are more remembered today are the ones that were a bit more focused on the adventures of being a teenager and had a bit more of a through line and a plot for each book rather than a sort of plot for each chapter.
It's very noticeable that the Chalet School, although we can speak of like these as the main characters, really does not have a protagonist because it is not sufficiently focused on any one person's life or actions to really have that, and it jumps around in perspective and point of view quite a lot. Some of it is about Madge, some of it is about Joey. Sometimes we get bits of the other girls and their internal lives. It's quite freewheeling in that way.
Whereas, like, for example, the St. Clair's books, while all the other characters kind of get a day in the limelight, like each book has like a different deuteragonist, or even a different protagonist, and the twins become the deuteragonists.
Yeah.
They are still about the twins' years at St. Clair's, the same way that almost all of the Mallory Towers books are about Daryl.
Right, and or something like What Katie Did at School.
Yeah, it's about Katie. And what she did at school.
And what she but it follows Katie, whereas the Chalet School books, which is part of the reason it was possible to write 58 of them, is because it doesn't really matter if one particular student graduates, because this is about the school and the life of the school body. Yeah. Yeah, it's very ensemble in that way.
It's definitely quite interesting because it is genuinely quite different. Whereas, like you said, with the Enid Blyton ones, I believe the Mallory Towers books started coming out a year after the final St. Clair's book.
Mm-hmm. Not a sequel, but directly following. Yeah,
because the characters we follow through St. Clair's have gone, so let's just move to another school and follow a different group of girls.
Let's start again from year one.
Yes. I think it is interesting to look at a book through this lens, because I think especially because this is a book that is of such a tropey genre.
Yeah. Not relevant to the analysis because it happens afterwards and isn't, very much a modern thing. But what the Chalet School reminds me of more than the other school stories, because of that more ensemble life of the school nature, this is like Grange Hill or the other like soap operas set in high schools that we have here.
Yeah, that's definitely what it feels like to me.
Where you'll have you have a fairly large cast, which is partly a practical thing because especially with child actors, they have to have their breaks and their holidays.
Yeah.
Which means you need to follow some other kids for a while. but you have a school that is your setting and a bunch of kids with their complicated interrelationships, and they've all got their own different home lives and their own different problems. And it works like a soap opera. It's Baker Grove.
Yeah,
Which was,
definitely.
I certainly watched some of when I was a child. I remember nothing that happened in any of it because it's not the sort of thing where stuff actually happening is the point.
You're just following these people.
You're just following these people. It's a parasocial relationship machine.
Yeah.
It's characters
it's
to care
interesting
about,
'cause-
but not characters for things to happen with.
I mean, we joked a bit about like posh boarding schools just as a thing, but like I think these books are agents of class in a way that I find really interesting because they were for everybody. Like everybody read these. Everybody across classes still reads these books.
Yeah.
Like
Could have
they're
used
in
the
it.
word, very trendy word, aspirational.
Yeah, they're aspirational, but they're also this sort of, like you say, parasocial relationship machines. They're about how charming and lovely the upper classes are. When, let's be honest, like British private schools are designed to be instruments of torture for children.
Yes.
Like they're not lovely and charming.
In a genuine design sense, you do not come up with the fagging system because you want the children to be happy and well adjusted.
Like, we didn't stop beating children in this country in schools until like the 70s. Like, I was alive when it became fully illegal to hit kids.
Right. And it's still controversial.
Yeah. I remember being told as a child that at the time, I can't remember why my parents were telling this. This was not in the context of a threat. I think I'd asked them. But being told that, like, they'd been told that the rule was as long as it didn't bruise, it wasn't abuse at the hands of a teacher. And that was in my era. Like, when my dad was at school, you still got slippered.
Yeah.
And for international listeners, again, slippering is exactly what it sounds like. It's when they hit you with a slipper.
Yeah. Beating you up with a shoe.
It's just hitting you with a shoe if you disobey them. And it was considered a lighter punishment than hitting you with a ruler, because rulers are harder.
Yeah. It is messed up.
Yeah, like, don't get me wrong, like, to an extent, boo-hoo, the upper classes had a rough time. But, like, the upper classes designed their schools to create the kind of people who could run empires, which requires you to be, frankly, a sociopath.
Yeah. In the same ways people sometimes talk about boot camp, as in basic training for the military, as part of the purpose of it is to teach you to dehumanize the enemy enough to kill them.
Yeah.
Upper class boarding schools are that, but for being rulers.
They are to teach you to dehumanize anyone who is beneath you and worship anyone who is above you.
Yeah. It is to teach you to be the kind of person who can kill en masse through government policy and not feel anything about it.
And to an extent, I think these books really are about exporting that culture to the people who can't afford to buy into it.
Yeah, and to teach you that your betters are better than you and can be trusted and have your best interests at heart.
Yeah.
It clearly works very well on us.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I love these books. I wasn't immune to propaganda aged 7. I adored these books. Yeah. I was a real Enid Blyton devotee.
I read a fair amount of Enid Blyton.
I think I read every Enid Blyton I could get my hands on. I had quite a few of the vintage ones that still had the racial slurs in, so my dad had to read them with me and tell me which words not to use.
I hope we manage to draw at some point, like, ideological analysis of the Faraway Tree. I think it'll be fascinating.
The Faraway Tree has so much going on.
There's a lot in the Faraway Tree.
But one of the things that's really interesting to me about the ones that I'm more familiar with, I don't know how much this appears in the Chalet School books, but, like, class comes up a lot in the Enid Blyton ones.
Yeah,
lot. Like one of the St. Clair's books has like an entire storyline about like Carlotta, who's a character who's sort of European and from a circus, because Enid Blyton had a real circus fixation, befriending somebody who's from a similar background to her, but unlike her doesn't have a rich relative. Who will send them away to first boarding school and then finishing school to become a proper lady and distance her from her low origin. Yeah. Like I think there's one later on where a character who is titled pretends to be a working class scholarship girl, complete with a fake Cockney accent.
Oh no.
Because she doesn't want to be treated differently.
Oh no.
And she's worried people will just want to make friends with her for her money. And this is treated as a very sympathetic thing that we should all understand. So I'm just like, okay.
We've all been there, yeah.
It's like, it is, the relationship with class is really inextricable from the entire genre.
Yes, and like the Chalet School in specific starts with this scene of these, of Dick and Madge discussing what they're going to do to make sure Madge and Joey have enough to live on.
Yeah.
And the answer they settle on is move to Austria and start a school.
And
this is presented as a normal, practical solution to your money problems.
Well, it's part of the time-honoured tradition that teaching young girls was one of the only acceptable professions for a well-bred young lady.
Yes.
Anything else is borderline prostitution.
Yes,
because you're providing services to men.
And
once you're providing any service to a man, you might as well be providing sexual services.
Yes, and it's also actually Madge isn't supposed to do it after she gets married.
No.
Being a head teacher of a girls' school is a thing for unmarried young ladies.
Absolutely, yes. Ideally, you marry the father of one of the children you're teaching.
Yeah, she ends up marrying the doctor who repeatedly comes to the school to help out and to treat Joey.
Yes, because that's why you have a job as a young woman.
It's to meet men.
To meet men.
And you have the right kind of job to meet men of the right kind of class.
Yeah. That's why she's not, a seamstress.
Right, exactly. It's simultaneously passing class structure and how to think about class as propaganda down to the reader, and enculturating the schoolgirls themselves into proper class behaviour.
Yeah.
It's like doing the propaganda both to the character and the reader.
It's why there's so much about slang. It's why there's so much about sort of all of the stuff we made fun of it for, the walks around the mountains and the needlecraft and things. Look, I'm not disputing the importance of needlecraft and walking, but you don't need to practice them every single day. You practice them every single day to prove you can afford to.
Right, they spend genuinely 2 hours a day doing needlework.
Oh my god, I quite like embroidery. If you made me do it for 2 hours a day when I was a kid, I would have just screamed. This is, again, a torture chamber designed to rob children of their capacity for thought.
Right. And because this is a girls' school, instead of teaching them to be sociopaths, we are teaching them to live with boredom.
We are simply teaching them to not have thoughts because those will make you want things.
Yeah. We are teaching them to exist in a state of boredom so profound it becomes meditative, where you can hem an apron for 3 hours and not really notice the time passing, because that's what you're going to be spending your life doing, so we need to get you in the habit of it quick. It's bleak. It's
really bleak, and this is the thing, is the whole point of these books is to make that not sound bleak, to make it sound fun and exciting.
Right, to make it sound like what you would like to do with your life is spend 3 hours a day doing unnecessary needlework.
Yes, because, you want to... It's not that you want to be a wife, it's you want to have midnight feasts and all of these lovely friends.
You want to prank each other by putting Vaseline on the blackboard.
Yes.
Which I understand from the book makes the chalk not right on it, but is not something that ever has happened to me, so I assume the book is correct. I have not tested.
Yeah, I feel like some of these things you've just got to take as read.
Yeah. The modern day equivalent is going around all the classrooms at night and taking the caps off the whiteboard pens.
Yeah, though that also seems like a big time investment for something that's just fundamentally not that fun.
I think when you are bored enough, it becomes funny. Or at least becomes exciting to try to get away with it.
Yeah, that's definitely got to be more of it, because none of the pranks in this are actually funny.
Well, actually, no, that's an interesting point that comes back to what you're saying about the class thing and the aspirational, this is how you're supposed to be. Getting away with it is not part of their pranks. Not getting noticed until the prank goes off is part of it, but then you have to own up. Because owning up to it means that you are playing the game and being straight with it is what they call it, and being properly English and honest about it, whereas not confessing to your pranks is a moral crime in a way that the prank isn't.
Well, also, all of these schools practice collective punishment.
They do
immediately with no questions.
Yes. Somebody did this, you are all skipping lunch.
Nobody is getting lunch until whoever put Vaseline on the chalkboards has confessed.
Yep. Nobody gets to go home.
All of the students learn that you simply must confess to all of your tricks.
Right, because it is also not done to snitch, which means we were all sitting here waiting for somebody to own up. And if anyone says, well, Joey did it, we will shun that person forever, but also if Joey does not own up, we will sit here till midnight.
Yes. It's the same
the only good solution is for Joey to own up.
there's quite a few scenes in other, I can't remember if there's any in the Chalet School, but definitely in other schoolgirl books, where somebody owns up to a prank on someone else's behalf and it becomes like a year-long drama.
Yeah. This is an act of great heroism and devoted friendship.
Yes.
I want to very briefly as well mention, it wasn't relevant in any way, but there is a beautiful... This was before we'd invented being straight.
Yeah.
And therefore before we'd invented lesbians. And therefore the whole little psychodrama of little Simone cutting off her hair and running away to sob on her own in the woods because Joey doesn't love her.
Oh my god, all of these books are so gay. Like, there's a...
She's
the one that was formative
child.
for me, the one that was really formative for me, because like Enid Blyton books have so much gender and queer in them because Enid Blyton was clearly just going through it. Like, look, I try not to armchair diagnose the sexualities of people in an era when we had very different concepts of gender and sexuality, but if you've ever read an Enid Blyton book, you know. You know.
If you've read the famous 5, there's some gender in that.
There's some gender in it. But there's one that gets me every single time I even think about it, which is in Sinclair's. There's a character the main character is the twins, the O'Sullivan twins, and they've got this cousin, Alison. And Alison's noticeable trait is that she absolutely worships other girls in her year who seem cool. And she always picks the worst people to worship. She always worships people who, like, are like mean or take advantage of her or like have her running around doing their chores or their homework. And I'm just like, oh baby, she's just gay.
She just really, really, really needs attention from like slightly older girls.
Like it's usually girls her own age who just seem a bit more worldly to her. But I'm also just like, oh no, she's just gay and has terrible taste in women.
Simone
like, every single book ends with her being betrayed by like her latest target of admiration, and all of the other girls go, "Oh, Alison, you've done it again.
Oh, baby,
you've fallen for a girl.
We need to get you grown up and in the queer book club.
Like, oh, you
find you someone nice.
For another girl who treats you like crap."
Yeah,
and she never learns, and I'm just like, oh god, Alison, I relate.
Similarly, Simone in this is just having a tiny lesbian crisis because she likes Joey and Joey doesn't like her. Even though Joey only like finds her mildly annoying, but she's like, if you are not my best bosom pal in all the world, life is not worth living. You need to promise me that you will not look at other girls.
Like, I've only just wondered this for the first time, but do non-British people talk about girl crushes the same way we do? Because I don't think I've ever heard one do it.
I don't know. I feel like girl crush is an internet term.
I don't know that I associate it with. Like,
I know we don't say girlfriends the way Americans do, because Americans mean it to mean their friends who are girls, which is just very confusing. That's
an old lady thing here. All of like definitely my grandmother and her generation all refer to their friends as girlfriends.
Interesting.
Whereas like I associate with girl crush with being something that like my mum said when I was like obsessing over a pretty girl at school and wanted to be her friend.
Yeah, maybe. I was not particularly prone to like crushes, honestly.
I was a really late bloomer, actually, so I didn't start having like crushes until I was in my like mid to late teens. But I definitely would have like brief periods of being just mildly obsessed with a girl and then forgetting she existed a week later.
Childhood.
Yeah, and like my mother always called those girl crushes, and so did like most other like women in my family. I'm under the impression that's what we've like always called them in England.
Could be. I do not know anything.
I'm now questioning whether or not that's an international term. But yeah, like this whole sort of atmosphere of the idea that teenage girls in particular just pick a cool girl to worship. And this is just a type of girl that does this. Like some girls will just fixate on particularly pretty or suave or interesting girls in their year. And it's all very normal and nobody needs to worry about it.
Follow them around like little ducklings and get, occasionally they have friend breakups and everyone is very, very dramatic about it. And this is definitely not gay. But it's
definitely not gay.
Aggressively not gay. The Chalet School is before we invented knowing about gay people. So it's just this Simone is just like a normal type of girl. She's the type who just needs Joey to love her back.
Yeah. And it's definitely a trope of particularly, I don't think I've identified a similar trope in the boys ones. In the girls' school book series, this is definitely a type of girl that there's always at least one.
Yeah, and I definitely recognise the imprinting on cool, not even cool by like regular standards, just older children who my child's brain thought were very cool for unclear reasons, and sort of slightly imprinting on them and wanting to like watch them when they're in the room, and do generally a little off-putting because I was a strange child.
Yeah. I definitely had a lot of those, partly because, as I said, I was like quite a late bloomer romantically, so I didn't start having like proper squishy feelings until quite late. But I definitely had I just want to stare at her feelings.
Yeah, I didn't have like attraction as such. I just had a sort of, on a pure charisma level, this is the most interesting person in the room and I want to follow them around a little bit.
Yeah.
Which is cute when it's a 12-year-old. You know, when you are having I want to follow this person around because they're very cool feelings, and you are 12, that is age appropriate.
That's just what 12-year-olds are like.
What 12-year-olds are like, and it's just, well, at least it's not one of your teachers.
Yeah.
It's this girl from another class who you will sometimes see across the lunchroom and go, she's so cool.
Yeah.
Objectively, she is extremely ordinary. So are you.
But yeah, there's a lot going on with gender in this gender and sexuality, but especially like the idea of what girls are is very interesting in some of these books.
Yeah, and because it's doing so much work, or the schools are doing so much work to train them to be proper young ladies, it really does cross over into not just proper young ladies brackets class behaviour, but proper young ladies brackets gender.
Yeah, well, also because
we are force-femming these children.
One of a very small like number of genres where you got women without men around at this point in history.
Yes.
Like, you didn't get books about women's book clubs or women hanging out together in the kitchen. They weren't popular. But there were endless books about schoolgirls. Because schoolgirls existed without men quite happily in a way that wasn't acceptable for women.
Yeah. Fascinating piece of men being really insecure about this. Princess Ida, which is it is one of the Gilbert and Sullivans, the same from the same writing team and the same stable of productions as like The Mikado and HMS Pinafore. It's one of the less popular ones. Princess Ida is about a girls' school discovering the need for men.
Okay.
And it is done as a comedy, but a large part of the comedy is these women think they can do without men. And then some men break in, and all the schoolgirls go, what is this wonderful thing? We've never seen this before. We must see more of this. We must cease to be isolated in our feminine bubble and become wives.
It's interesting, because like in the books that are aimed at young girls, in particular, there is a complete disinterest in men.
Right, this is very different, and I think in the modern version of this, you would have the girls talking about boys and who they had a crush on and trying to get out of the school so they could go and see boys. None of that here.
Like,
these girls have no interest in boys.
I mean, the thing is, I did go to a single-sex school, and it's pretty accurate. There is simply no interest in men. You talk about boys maybe with your friends occasionally.
Right, I do think that
mostly off school grounds.
Teenagers, especially high school age teenagers, which is to say like 16 and under, are a lot less interested in boys than TV shows made with stars in their 20s pretending to be 17 at American high school. Like the TV shows, especially about this is what teenagers are like, are hornier than real teenagers.
Yeah,
and are more romantically preoccupied than real teenagers.
Just like, I think, especially in the context of boarding school, school is so a different world from the rest of the world around you when you're a kid. Like, you don't take your out-of-school life into school if you can possibly avoid it. Yeah. And if you're in a single-sex school, there simply are no boys. There are male teachers, but people... Like, there'll be one male teacher who everyone agrees is the dreamy one, but no one's even
there'll be the designated hot teacher.
Yeah, there's like the designated hot teacher, the same way there's the designated nice teacher. It doesn't mean anyone's planning on doing anything about it. Like, no one's
everyone does still understand
them.
that, like, actually getting involved with the hot teacher would be weird and unpleasant.
Yeah, and there's no age-appropriate boys around, so you simply don't really think about boys that much during school time because you're in school world. And I think that probably goes double for if you're at a boarding school.
I think it probably does.
Yeah.
I do think if this were written now, you would have girls sneaking away to meet the local boys. And I don't know if
Yeah.
I'm not saying that would be more accurate to the behaviour of teenagers, but as
No,
the
it would
genre
just
has
feel
changed.
obligatory to include it. I didn't go to boarding school. I had a friend who did, who was in an all boys boarding school, and I once went to see a school play of his because his parents were on holiday and couldn't make it.
Mhm.
And I do remember the feeling of being the only, then girl at an all boys boarding school being a little bit like being a goldfish dropped in a piranha tank.
Right?
Like there was just a ripple of boys becoming aware that there was a girl in the midst. And it was actually mildly terrifying.
I can believe that. Also, yes, they do plays at boys' schools, and yes, there are girls in the plays, but which means, yes, the great British theatrical tradition of cross-dressing is also a boarding school thing.
We did Annie at my school, and Daddy Warbucks was just played by the tallest girl.
Yeah, like, yes, we do it for pantomime, but also, yeah, cross-dressing for the theatre is still a thing.
Yeah, we definitely did a few pantos where we had pantomime dames. And to be honest, like, I think what people who didn't attend single-sex schools really miss is that when there is an age-appropriate person of the opposite sex, it's open season and not in a sexy way. Like, I moved schools for sixth form, but I was still at a single-sex school. But what we have quite a lot of in the UK are schools that are single-sex age 11 to 16, and then mixed aged, like, 16 to 18.
Mm-hmm.
I went to one of those for sixth form, and those boys were harassed. The lower school girls would chase the boys through the corridors for fun.
Right, not so much as a sex thing as because they found an alien.
Yeah, like, they would mob them. Like, in the first week where, like, there were new boys, they would have trouble getting to class on time because the younger girls would just attack them in the corridors for fun.
Yeah, sorry, I have been kidnapped by a gaggle of 12-year-olds.
Like, what are they going to do? They can't fend them off. You're a 16-year-old boy and they're 11.
Not allowed to push the 12-year-olds out of your way. It's not done.
If they decide to swarm you and take you to the art block, you're going to the art block.
Right, what are you going to do? Resist?
Like, I remember when I was in lower school, when I was at this single-sex private school, we had a Russian exchange with a mixed school. And so there were like 3 or 4 Russian boys. And I remember, like, in the reception area where they were getting signed into the school and stuff, one of them was like really confidently, like, you know, the way teenage boys pretend they're getting mad pussy.
Uh-huh.
Like, just to swagger. And everyone knows it's not true. They're not even really pretending it's true.
That's just the thing you say, yeah.
It's just bravado. But like, one of these boys was like very boldly talking about how much he was going to get it on in London. And then they stepped into the main school and were just fucking massacred by the 12-year-old girls.
All suavity
He was
lost.
terrified. I thought he was going to run. Like, I'm sorry, if you released an age-appropriate boy into the Chalet School, they would like you know, in old-timey movies when the savage natives.jpg have like spears and they're pushing you towards the mouth of the volcano.
A 12-year-old boy in the Chalet School would end up trapped on the roof.
It's just what you do when there's only one boy and there's 400 girls.
You gang up on them. It's a biological imperative.
Like, you know, you're supposed to have some kind of feelings, but you don't have them yet, and you're not
just
sure if
egging
you
each
should...
other on to do something about this.
Yeah, it's just they'd be surrounding him in a swarm, taking turns to go, "No, you poke him."
Right.
Honestly, that should have been an
for
episode.
boys.
That should have been one of the books. It would have been great. Just they release a single 12-year-old boy.
At the Chalet School. It fits with the titling scheme and everything.
Yeah, it was just like there was some kind of mix-up. He's got to stay there for 2 months while they arrange for him to be transferred.
His parents
to
thought
his
it was a
boarding
mixed school. They've got off to climb a mountain in Russia.
They're trying to find a place for him at the boarding school for boys on the other mountain.
In the meantime, he and his sister are here.
Yeah, this is like the only accurate version of this is Derry Girls, where as soon as a boy is dropped into a girls' school, they just immediately start bullying him.
Oh, yeah. The boy would not be having a good time.
Don't get me wrong.
Surrounded by teenage
in Derry
girls is
Girls,
not
it
a good
doesn't help
time.
that he's English, but any boy dropped into that school would have been stripped.
Yeah.
Not sexually, just to force him to walk home in his underwear.
Yeah, just because gang was not... Mob thinking takes over, and the mob is not smart and doesn't have a plan. And now you don't have any shoes. It just...
We had this thing at school called for Pink Day. I think it's for World Cancer.
I think so, yeah.
At my sixth form, so in the UK we have Mufti Day, which is where you're allowed to not wear your school uniform for a day. Sometimes it's like at the end of term as a treat, but quite often schools will do it as a fundraiser thing, so everybody in the school has to give a donation and you get to wear your own clothes for a day.
It becomes a whole thing because we'd otherwise don't get to wear our own clothes.
Yes, and quite often there'll be like a theme. Like I remember one year at my school they made us do florals, and I didn't own any floral clothes, and I was so annoyed by it. I wore my school uniform and got really annoyed when anyone asked me if I'd forgotten it was Mufti Day. I was like, no, I'm proving a point.
This is a protest.
I'm proving a point. I refuse to give money to charity and also buy florals. With hindsight, it was maybe not like an elegant point to make, but I was 12 in my defense. But at my sixth form, which was the one where it was mixed at sixth form, we had this thing called Pink Day, where everybody would wear pink to like donate money to breast cancer awareness, and you also had to donate like £2 or whatever when you came in. And they let a bunch of 14-year-olds have the morning off from classes to check everyone was wearing pink.
Mm-hmm.
And how it would work is you'd be just sitting in class and this terrifying mob of the scariest age, which is 14-year-old girls, would burst in, run around the room, and if they found anyone not wearing pink, they would drag you to detention, like physically drag you.
That is a 14-year-old girl behaviour, yeah.
It is 14-year-old girl behaviour, but obviously the only people who were consistently not wearing pink were the most annoying boys.
Uh-huh. Yeah, because they're the boys who are like, I'm not wearing pink and I'm not doing a thing for, like, girl fundraising.
Exactly. So they were the worst boys. They were the boys no one liked, as opposed to, like, the chill boys who would just be like...
all rejoice when they are physically dragged away.
They'd just be like, no, look, I've got a bit of pink on my trainers, it's fine. Like, the shy boys or the, like, generally affable boys would just, like, borrow a scarf from their sister or, like, wear a bag that had one pink stripe on it, and everyone would be like, yeah, fair enough. We're not going to make you buy stuff. Whatever. But there was always 2 or 3 boys who would just, like, refuse to do it and get kidnapped by the 14-year-olds. And we were in, like, A-level classes. Like, they just get dragged out of class.
People.
We were, like, fully adults. Like, I remember a kid in my maths class got kidnapped by the pink mob, and I just didn't see him for the rest of the day.
He's just disappeared.
He's just gone. I was like, doesn't he need to know this for the exam? Like, should someone be making notes for him?
Well, then he should have worn pink, shouldn't he?
That's what you get for not wearing pink. You get, like, and they were violent. Like, they would literally drag you out of your chair and out of the room and down the hall to detention. And these are the things that actual teenage girls get up to at school.
Yes. The girls at the Chalet School are much better behaved because they are nice, genteel girls.
If they'd been told they were allowed to do it, though. Like, if they had been told at the Chalet School, like, no, you get to do violence because it's to help people with cancer.
They would have done so much violence.
They would have committed war crimes. They would have found a way.
This is why hockey was invented, actually. Yeah. It's because you need to give the teenage girls an outlet.
Otherwise, they will find an outlet in beating the shit out of teachers.
Right. You need to give them an authorised fight zone. And that's what hockey is. Unfortunately, it's then made compulsory, which is not a good idea.
No, making it compulsory just, like, I think it's a way of thinning out the crop.
Compulsory
it's like
fight zone.
In rugby.
We're opposed. Voluntary fight zone, necessary for teenagers.
Like, if fagging is designed to rob you of any sense of, like, emotional kindness or empathy or, like, desire to help those weaker than you, rugby is designed to teach you that it's every man for yourself.
Yeah. No one is coming to save you, the lesson of school.
Like, girls might lose teeth to hockey, but, like, I don't think anyone who went to school before about 1975 in Britain didn't know one kid who nearly died in a game of rugby.
Mm-hmm.
Like, anybody in the UK, if you ask your dad, like, hey, did you do rugby at school? He'll be like, yeah. And if you're like, did anyone ever, like, have a compound fracture? He'll be like, oh, yeah, there was stupid Billy. He was stupid because we bashed his head in against the goalposts. And you're just like...
Right.
What?
We sat on Fatty for, like, 6 minutes.
Yeah. Also, the little nicknames everyone has for each other in these books at the time, not exaggerated.
I mean, my school didn't do it, but my school was class-wise.
Oh, that's because we had like a massive... We had a massive attempt to get rid of them in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Because we were like, maybe the institutionalized bullying should be a little less.
It was the campaign that came before Hug a Hoodie, which itself came right before Don't Say Gay, Say Awful, or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
I grew up in the Hug a Hoodie era.
I grew up right at the end of Section 28.
Yeah, no, I grew up in the hugger hoodie era, which was the era where we were like trying to teach like children about love because we thought all of the kids were like just basically feral animals. I was like, if you show your local teenagers a little bit of affection, they might not burn down your house.
It's a
I was
nice
like,
theory. And
well,
then we invented the ASBO instead.
you defunded all the youth centres, man. What are we meant to do?
Right.
If I could go to a local discotheque and play table tennis, I'd do that. But since I can't, arson.
And this is why they let the girls at the Chalet School start a magazine, because eventually, otherwise, arson will happen.
Arson will happen if you leave teenagers unsupervised for long enough.
I believe this is also true of adults.
This is also true of adults. People
it does
get
take
bored.
longer.
People need things to do, or they will invent them. It's like how if you leave someone alone in a waiting room long enough, they'll start like tearing apart paper cups and stuff.
Yeah. Humans are smart tool-using monkeys, and they will find something to use tools on. Okay.
Okay, yes. Shall we get on with rolling some die, or do you have any closing thoughts?
My closing thoughts are this was a really fun exercise, and I would love for the listener to either send me their version or like apply this to works of their choice. I would love to see this done more. I think this was good. I like puzzles. It's a fun puzzle.
Yeah, we will definitely do this again. It was really fun.
It's good fun. Okay. Your turn to roll dice, I believe.
It is. I need to just quickly take Retrosynthetic out of the die.
Mm-hmm.
Is this going back in the hat?
I don't think it's got enough substance.
Yeah, I think I'd quite like to put in another of that sort of era of children's literature.
Yeah, I think so. I feel like we've got an Enid Blyton in there already.
I think we do. Let me have a look. Yes, we have the famous 5 currently in the hat. When that is removed, I intend to replace it with Mr. Pinkwhistle, which is my personal favourite Enid Blyton. It's the one I was obsessed with as a kid.
Excellent. So not an Enid Blyton, but something else on the classic children's novel.
Do Anne of Green Gables we mentioned earlier?
Yeah, let's put Anne of Green Gables in. Foundational text.
That's in our classics section. Okay, and I'm just pulling up a random number generator. And we're down to 3 schools of analysis.
Ooh, nearly there.
I'm really excited. Okay, generate a number between 1 and 3. 3. New historicist.
Oh, you'll have to tell me what that is.
So basically, new historicism is the idea of understanding literary development through intellectual history and vice versa. So what ideas of their time are being expressed in this work.
Oh, okay. Like if you read a novel and you're like, well, I know at this point they were inventing, nihilism.
It's like, I think at university I called this history of ideas, but that's
it makes sense.
Less commonly used term.
Take this thing and then compare it to what philosophy was being done at the time, or what was politically the ideology, or
Okay.
Had they invented gay people yet?
Exactly. Yes. And then I'm going to roll a 101-sided die. This could go very interesting.
Could go very strange.
21. Oh, that's quite high actually. Chrétien du Toit. We're back to medieval France.
Okay. I have no idea what they were doing politically and philosophically in medieval France, but like some stuff, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm going to have to go and get some of my undergraduate notes out of their ring binders.
Yeah. We're in an area of expertise here, and it's yours.
And we're in, specifically, I think we narrowed it down from the broader works of Chrétien to just Lancelot. So you're going to be reading Lancelot, the Knight of the Cart.
Sounds good to me. I'm excited.
I think you'll enjoy it if you haven't already read it. It's one of the ones that does float around in translation.
Yeah, no, I don't think I have read it. I am excited to read some like original or at least early Lancelot stuff.
Yeah, we'll have a really good time comparing it to the last bit of Lancelot I made you read.
I enjoyed the last bit of Lancelot you made me read as well.
Yes. Ooh, I'm really excited for this. This is going to be really good fun. I'm going to have to go and do some revision.
You are. I'm going to find that thing and read it, and that'll be my extent of contributing to this next analysis.
If you have any trouble finding it, just let me know, and
I will
send you an approved translation that doesn't suck.
Fantastic. All right, thank you for joining us, listener, and we'll see you next time.
Goodbye.
Bye. You've been listening to Analysis Roulette, a podcast applying a randomly selected mode of analysis to a randomly selected creative work. just to see what happens. Your hosts have been Dia and Duck. You can find us on Spotify or on YouTube, and if you'd like to get in touch, you can send us an email at analysisroulette@gmail.com. And remember, if you like our show, share it with your friends, and if you don't like our show, share it with your editors. Thanks.